What are some clothing standards that people have?
People make a lot of judgments based on your external. If I look like I have on a hoodie, I don't look like I'm going to church.
Sleeveless dress, but apparently it's a no-no. So I had received a few feedbacks from that.
Gotta wear that suit and tie, man.
No, you don't, bro. No, you don't, bro.
Also, long clothing versus short clothing. Dresses or skirts, they're supposed to be a particular length.
Like dressy, not casual, really.
Okay. Somebody
No,
mentioned.
there was like,
And
they would say like
jeans.
put on your Sunday best.
You cannot wear, they don't like jeans.
The clothing should be respectful of the house of worship that you're in, because it's God's house, and you wouldn't go see the king unless you were dressed a certain way.
So yeah, that's another thing that people.
I'm tired of hearing that though, because honestly,
yes,
that
and,
doesn't make sense.
Skirt should be a little bit past your like your knee, especially when you sit down. It should not tap your knee, as well as no cleavage. Should be shown.
They have a lot of rules about dress. You know, this was in the 70s when I went, so mini skirts were still in fashion. That was absolutely a no-no. And you couldn't wear pants, I think, or if you did wear pants, you had to wear a tunic top, so that your top covered, came down to your thighs and covered the curvaceous pieces of you. I'm actually surprised. I just assumed that these kind of very superficial and arbitrary rules were a thing of the past. So if we're coming before the king, and the king says, "Come as you are," and if you don't have a suit, come as you are, because otherwise it becomes a huge barrier. If I feel that I can't come to church, or number one, because people will judge me. That's a huge barrier. Number two, I'm being cut off from my communication with my king, because he's more concerned about my clothes.
The problem isn't the clothes necessarily. It's the traditions that we have with it, because clothes vary from culture to culture. What may be right in America may be different in Africa, and it may be different in another area, or even with older and younger. Even if I come to church in that manner, I don't need to be shamed.
I grew up where they had an emergency tie, just in case you were called to go to the platform and you don't have a tie. And then they also had a skirt, just in case a woman went up there. And 1 Samuel, it tells us very clearly that God looks at the heart and not necessarily at the outer areas. When it comes to tradition, some people hold that tradition so much to the point where they get it twisted with the Bible.
I remember talking with some people and said, well, why don't we wear a top hat? Or why don't we wear a white bow tie and a white vest? Like who comes up with the idea that the semi-formal / business is the standard? But what about women's clothing? Don't ever think about coming and wearing pants. You want to get rid of all of the sleeveless clothing options. And these ones are too casual. These are not even church clothes.
Is that a lot of our churches have come from a Catholic background. And with a Catholic background, they usually have those very strict standards.
I think that people keep those rules, or try to keep those rules to assimilate with the culture of the church, or whatever the belief of the place is. Then they have to make sure they do these things so that they're not like ostracized or called out by the people that are there.
But you can have unity without uniformity.
There's definitely a call for us to be humble, not to be showing cleavage and stuff, if we wear makeup, not to be like with those red lips and, calling attention to yourself. Surely the length of the dress is important.
So what length, if we were to take out a ruler, what length should it be?
I think a little bit below the knee, the person who's across from you would have an indecent side of you. So I'm not saying that when our sisters or brothers do something like that, they're doing it because they want to call attention to others. It's just because they like it. They like the way they look. They like the way they feel. But we have to be minded of others too.
You know, it's either, you know, what you just mentioned, or you're wearing a potato sack. And I don't want to look that way going to church. I think being fashionable is meeting the needs of people who haven't heard the word yet, because people just assume that, oh, there's people who look formal or basically stuck up, and I don't want to be just seen as a person who just or higher, or I feel like I'm more important than you. So it's just more about me wearing something that I can relate to you more.
A newcomer asked that in our class. Why is it that your church does not allow us to wear this and to wear that, you know? Because she was telling that we are very strict. That's the reason she doesn't want to come to church anymore, that we are like hypocrites. And I said to her that, you know, we never say to people not to come to our church, or we never shoo away when they come there in pants or in miniskirts or in you know, this kind of dresses, sleeveless.
Nobody will go around stating, hey, you can't come in here wearing that way. No, that's true. However, if you come in, let's say, without a shirt or without the standard, then people almost give it like the cold shoulder type of thing. I know that happened to me once, that I was running late or whatever. I went to church without a tie. People look at me like, what the heck? Like, what's wrong with you? Or whatever. And then when I put on my tie, then later somebody came up to me like, hey, now you look good. I'm like, wow, okay.
When I came to the church, for the first 2 years, I was in suit and tie, and then as I got comfortable, I just started to stop wearing the tie, and I noticed that folks will kind of give me like a cold shoulder and just turn away, feeling that I'm not dressing appropriately.
How does culture play a role in the way we dress?
In Africa, we could see that there's many different ways of dressing.
But you don't have to leave even the United States to see the different cultures, because what's acceptable, for example, in New York City, in the Village, San Francisco, as opposed to what's going on in rural Pennsylvania, there's a wide variance of what happens. And even if you go back biblically, I would venture to say that men were wearing robes, but yet you don't see men today coming to church in robes. They're wearing Western suits. I don't feel immodest if my skirt is above the knee. I mean, if it's way above, 10 inches above the knee, then yeah, I may feel a little immodest because, everything is on display. But so, I don't know where this line is, and here it is that I may come to the church in a very different way, and because God works on my heart,
yes,
something else may evolve. I don't know what that something is and where the right thing is, but I think I have to come as I am, and I would have hoped that the church could accept me as I am, and then you kind of grow with it.
Yes,
and it's something simple like me wearing a sleeveless shirt or sleeveless blouse stops me from entering the church. Wow, that's pretty devastating.
Culture definitely plays a huge part. I know that when I was in Palau, there were times where I would go into the church with beach gear, with shorts and flip-flops and stuff, and that would be okay, but then in some churches here, forget about it.
Why do people feel that it is a sin to look nice? Why is it that we are basing holiness off of looks?
I think it's because people equate looking nice with vanity and attention seeking. So if you're spending a lot of time on your hair or your makeup or the clothes that you're wearing, then you must be looking for attention, and you're clearly not focused on God. I disagree with that.
Is there anything wrong with looking nice?
No.
Not at all.
Is it okay with wanting to look nice?
I think it's okay.
So why is it that if I want to look nice, then that comes across as vanity? The wrong thing that Adam and Eve were doing were trying to clothe themselves. God had to clothe them, and they were in the right. That was symbolic of something, though. What was it symbolic of?
The righteousness of Christ.
Job chapter 29, verse 14 says that it was the robe of righteousness. Right now, the standard of holiness has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 5. A woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear woman's clothing, for the Lord your God detests anyone who does this. There had to be a visual difference between a man's clothing and a woman's clothing, although they both wore robes. For us to look at their robes, it would be like, well, they look the same to me, but for them, they could tell the difference. Everybody wore a dress. They could tell the difference between a woman's robe and a man's robe. Is there a difference in today's culture between a man's pants and a woman's pants?
Yeah. Yes,
there is a difference.
Yes.
Maybe if somebody was in the Bible days were to look at a pants today and be like, they both look like pants to me, I can't tell the difference. But today, in today's culture, we all can tell the difference between a man's pants and a woman's pants. So the idea of saying that a woman cannot wear a pants is taking a verse out of context. Or like, well, because men wear pants. If a man were to wear a woman's pants, that would be considered cross-dressing. So the principle here is not dressing purposely to look like the opposite sex.
1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, it talks about dressing modestly. But again, I feel like that's up to the person's interpretation, right? Because my interpretation of modesty might not be the same as someone else's. For example, I don't feel like it's immodest to wear a sleeveless dress, but I would feel like it's immodest to show cleavage.
In like manner also, that women adorn themselves with modest apparel, with shamefacedness, or in other words, humility, a better word, sobriety, and not with broided hair. That's talking about braiding hair with gold and pearls or costly array, but with which becometh a woman professing godliness with good works. So it says that the woman should clothe herself with good works. So wait a minute, we gotta look at the principle here. The principle is that what your focus should be isn't the clothing, but good actions. It's talking about good works and not focusing on the outward adornment. And then it says, let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. And again, I find it interesting how we apply one verse, but then we don't apply the next verse, women be quiet in church. We say, well, that one's cultural, but the other verse, that's not cultural. So how can one verse be cultural, but the verse before be universal? It's either we gotta take a look at the context, the cultural context of everything, or none of it. You cannot have a double standard. It's either you're gonna apply the whole chapter and say the whole chapter applies today, or we say it doesn't. The general principle of what Paul was saying was modesty, and not focusing on the outward appearing. But yet we take that verse and we do the opposite. We focus on the outward adorning. So at the end of the day, you have to look at the principles that are there and see, well, what are my intentions? What is the principles that I want to have? In Matthew 11, verse 8, it says, if not, what did you go out to see? Talking about John the Baptist, a man dressed in fine clothing, or fine clothes? No, those who wear fine clothes are in king's palaces. So this is interesting that Jesus gives the exact analogy that we make today about dressing before the king, but he gives it for the opposite. He says, no, John did not dress like he would go before a king. He wasn't dressed in very good clothing. He wore clothing made from camel's hair, a leather belt around his waist. He looked very homeless-like, if anything. And he says, look, he doesn't dress like he's going before the king. Yet he baptized the king. Matthew 23, verse 5. Everything they do, talking about the Pharisees and scribes, everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries, in other words, their robes wide, and the tassels on their garments long. In other words, when he talked about the religious leaders who tried to dress up, he talked about them negatively. Look at them. Look at how they're trying to dress all fancy. Look at their long clothes. Look at that. Look, because why? They did it because they want people to see them. And we've created a system, a standard of holiness based on what people see. Reverence wasn't something confined to a place, because church is wherever you are. So at your home and you're having worship, that's church. Right now, we're in church. I don't see anybody wearing a long dress. I don't see anybody wearing a suit. The only question you should ask, can I wear this in public? when you look at the Bible, when you look at what all these people wore, you don't ever see a difference from what they wore day to day, their everyday clothing, and what they wore when they came to the synagogue. Remember, they couldn't go even into the temple, right? So there was no difference. See, we like to compartmentalize our life like, this is my church clothes, this is my regular life clothes. I can't wear pants to church, but I will wear pants to the supermarket. That doesn't make sense. It's either it's modest or it's immodest.
Right.
It's either it's right or it's wrong. If it's wrong for church, then it should be wrong for everywhere. So
that's right.
We should ask ourselves, is this modest to go out in public? If I can go to the supermarket wearing this, then I can go to church wearing this. Because at the end of the day, the building is not the church. It's like the people. So how do I look when I show up in front of people? That's church, where 2 or 3 are gathered. In the Desire of Ages, the context is when Jesus cast out people from the temple. A very irreverent thing to do, by the way. And afterwards, it says, the contrast between Jesus and the high priest as they talked together was marked. The proud dignitary of the temple was clothed in rich, costly garments. Upon his head was a glittering tiara. His bearing was majestic. His hair was long, flowing beard were silvered by age. His appearance awed the beholders. Before the august personage stood the majesty of heaven. The majesty of heaven. This is how the king dressed. The majesty of heaven, without adornment or display. His garments were travel stained. His face was pale and expressed patient sadness. Yet written there were dignity and benevolence that contrasted strangely with the proud, self-confident, and angry air of the high priest. I want you to notice here the difference.
Beautiful.
The people of the temple all wore very fancy clothes. It almost sounds like it's talking about Jesus, but it's not. What did Jesus wear? He wore travel stained garments. If I today were to come to church with clothes that are stained, it wouldn't look very nice. You would say, well, that's not wearing your best. You should have cleaned your clothes before you came to church. Now, Jesus had plenty of followers that would have been willing to donate clothes to him. He had money. People were donating. They could have bought new clothes. Jesus could have miraculously, cleaned his clothes without the stains. Jesus didn't come dressed the best. See, what was there wasn't the clothes. Many of those who witnessed the words and deeds of Jesus in the temple from that time enshrined him in their hearts as a prophet of God. You see, what created respect from the people wasn't the way how Jesus was dressed, because he was dressed so much lower than the people of the temple. It was his words and his actions. See, man looks at the outward appearance, but God the heart. You see, Jesus could have dressed up, but he didn't do it purposely. Why? Because Jesus was a man of the people of the street. And so he dressed like the people of the street. You see, we create standards because we want to make ourselves better than somebody else. Yet Jesus was always trying to humble himself to be able to reach somebody else. So when we dress, let's not think about, oh, well, I need to impress somebody. Think about, how can I reach somebody?